Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Collective Clicks podcast. This is your host, Brandon Bateman, and today I'm joined by Steve Richards. Steve is the co-founder of Team Architects. They're a recruiting company that specializes just in working with real estate investors. They help you assess the people on your team, get more out of the people that are on your team, and recruit new people that match the roles very specifically that you're hiring for. Steve and I talk in this episode, ironically, not that much about recruiting. We talk a lot about leadership. We talk a lot about growing as a business owner to help your company then grow and what he's learned over his many, many years of experience in doing that. I'll see you there. Steve, how you doing today?
Good, man. I'm glad to be here. Excited to see you.
Yes, likewise. It's been, I don't know how long that we've known each other now, probably three
Something like that.
years, something like that, but always a good time. You now have facial hair, right? So this is like a different Steve that I didn't feel like I knew before. But anyways, for everybody here that doesn't know you, who are you? Where you come from?
Yeah. So, gosh, sometimes Brandon, these like origin stories get kind of boring, or you feel like you've told it 100 times. So I might let you dig in more. But I went to business school. I got an undergrad degree in business, and I got out in the late '90s. And I was fortunate enough I had an emphasis in information systems. That's what they called it back then, almost 30 years ago, but really close to 30 years ago. I was really fortunate to get to do a lot of .com consulting and be involved in high tech and software, and really cool time. And I think a lot of people have that story where they're like, yeah, I had a lemonade stand when I was a kid, or I bought candy and I flipped it and resold it out of my locker at school or whatever. I didn't do that stuff as a kid particularly, but I do think that entrepreneurial people just are who they are. And I don't know that they get bit and infected by entrepreneurialism, by the entrepreneurial bug. But I revealed my entrepreneurial side, which was cool while I was in corporate America. So I kind of had that safety blanket of like a great job and, great salary and all these, I was around a lot of startups, and it's like, Pegarators on Fridays, and everyone's got cool like pool tables in their offices. It was just a really cool vibe then. And, that really slid into, as the dot com bust happened, it really slid into Y2K projects where people, as a computer geek yourself, like they thought the world was going to end because all the 99s were going to flip to 00s and like crash the world economy, which none of it happened, by the way, obviously. But really unique time to kind of cut my teeth, to be around smaller startups that had a lot of venture capital was involved. So I got to see a lot of VC and private equity stuff early on, and then followed up by a lot of really big clients. I lived in Indiana my whole life until I was 50. I moved to Texas, and I live in Austin now. But back in Indiana, we had clients like Eli Lilly, Roche Diagnostics, Conseco Financial, like these big billion-dollar behemoths, the Defense Department. And kind of in the second part of my 8 years in corporate, we were at these big companies that thought the world was going to end versus like the startup. And I got to see this really cool gamut of things. I was involved in a couple startups of my own back then, a couple tech startups, like a Facebook before Facebook, really more LinkedIn before LinkedIn existed. Really great ideas. And then I learned at that time how execution and connections matter in startups. And 320 somethings that start a business in Indiana in the early 2000s, don't really have much of a chance of making it back then. But we learned a lot of really cool things. And kind of jumping in the story to keep it moving, when I got out of the startups I was involved in was in 2004. And quite frankly, I got into real estate investing on a side thing. I thought, well, I'll buy some rental houses and I'll pay for my kids' college, and 20 years from now, I'll sell them off, or I'll have retirement or whatever. And so I started buying some rentals with a buddy from the gym. And 6 months into that, I was like, holy crap, you can actually, back then you could fog a mirror and you could, get 100% financing on a property and borrow more than what you were purchasing it for. And you could easily flip properties, and rent to owns worked very differently back then, seller financing. And so I got into that stuff pretty quickly. And within 6 months, I was flipping 5 houses a month. And within a year, I owned 40 rentals. And that was all back in 2005 and 6. And so about 20 years ago. And then really over the following 10 years, I learned everything I didn't know about business. And in 2013, it was interesting. I was at an Infusionsoft, which is now called Keep, for all you youngins that don't know that. But I was at this big conference with thousands of people, by the way. Simon Sinek was the speaker. And there was a gal I met there who owned 6 different Keller Williams franchises all around the country, and they all had over 100 agents. And she lived in Denver where none of her agencies were. And she ran them very profitably. And I was back in Indiana running my construction business, management business, retail, real estate. Like we had all these aspects that I was running by myself, and none of them were that. They were all self-employed ventures, where I had teams. I wasn't a true business owner. I was very stuck in the day-to-day, and I was just in awe of how this girl could live in Denver and run businesses all over the country profitably that she wasn't involved in. And she's like, hey, let me give you a book. This will help you. It's by a guy that I know named Gino Wickman. And she handed me a copy of Traction. And I didn't know anybody that was talking about that book back then, but I read that book and I just had an existential crisis of like how terrible my businesses were built and how wrong everything was. And if I'm going to rebuild it, I'm not going to be in property management, and I'm not going to be in renovations and construction anymore. And I really took to heart that first chapter when you look at core values, and I kind of started rebuilding things. And at the same time, I was going through an early midlife crisis, I guess. And I really started going to therapy and counseling and coaching. And I'd always done that stuff, but I'd gotten kind of so big in my own little bubble in Indianapolis. I ran my own RIA, ran my own company, and was kind of a big fish in that medium-sized pond. I wasn't in masterminds then. I didn't have a business coach anymore. I was very detached. And so I started working on myself at the same time, and kind of got back out in the world. And I was like, whoa, I'm just not doing this thing right. And so I reinvented myself, reinvented my business. And it only took a couple of years after that to build businesses I could get out of, escape the day-to-day. And I grew my income quite a bit. And, the big thing, which I think we'll touch on today, is the beginning of what would later in 2020 become Team Architects. I really started to figure out how to utilize personality testing, more importantly, cognition testing, analyzing how people fit in positions and how those positions fit with processes and how those processes fit in business models and how those business models are applied to goals and how a business actually runs rather than a self-employed entrepreneurial venture. And that was the beginning of me starting a very successful coaching practice. And now I look back on all that and I realize it was just that was kind of my MBA, was that first 10 years in real estate. And kind of my second undergrad, I had my business degree, but my second undergrad was all that work I did in corporate America. And then after that, I kind of got my master's in things by just running that first business wrong for 10 years. And and I spent most of my time in Indy. Like I said, I've done thousands of real estate transactions. Currently, I help run, which you and I know each other from both of these, but I'm on the board of directors for Boardroom Mastermind and help facilitate that group. I help run Family Mastermind, which is probably the best real estate mastermind no one knows about to some degree. It's not for operators. It's for people that support the real estate industry, kind of like Bateman and Team Architects and companies like that. And then I'm a co-owner and founder of the Team Architects company that helps people get the right butts in the right seats, not only with really deep analytical level recruiting services. That's the cheapest, best recruiter you've ever seen, but it actually helps you squeeze more juice out of your current team. And those are all pieces that I do that kind of feed into the coaching practice. And in the coaching practice, my partner Jacqueline and I, we have a branch that does counseling and therapy. It's really interesting, Brandon. I think you'd probably agree with this, but most of the entrepreneurs, many of the coaching clients we have are men. And if they've been in business for more than 5 to 10 years, their spouse is probably traumatized with financial security issues, where one day they have $1 million in the bank and the next day they're getting sued and they might be talking to a bankruptcy. And then they have $1 million again. And, the therapy counseling side is probably less proudly talked about, but it's all the same as personal growth. Whether you're trying to grow gifts or you're trying to heal wounds, we look at one as going down or healing, and we look at one as growing. But the reality is it's just expansion. It's just learning what you don't know, getting rid of blind spots and increasing your awareness and improving your tool belt. And a lot of the wounds that we heal give us perspective to take advantage of the gifts that we were given as an entrepreneur, and it goes hand in hand. And so we help with the therapy counseling side of things with the owners and their spouses and their kids many times, as well as do the private coaching with the business. And then we run spiritual growth retreats that are kind of like a decade of therapy in 48 hours here in Austin. But there's a lot of wordsmithing there for you, Brandon. But at the end of the day, I'll just say this. I think that anyone that's watching this, my guess is they're looking to grow as a human and be more happy and successful as a human. And part of that's going to be them advancing by becoming a better business owner and a stronger leader. And that's what I'm here to do, is help people evolve and grow. Mouthful.
Yeah, I love that. I couldn't help but think. So Steve, you have a few more years under your belt than I do. And I mean that like in an endearing way. I'm not trying to insult you. It's the gray beard shows wisdom, right? And you talked about like, your second undergrad, this MBA, like whatever, all these like experiences that have kind of contributed to this piece of your skill set over time. And it's crazy because in hindsight, it's like, oh yeah, I learned this from that, I learned that from that. But like in practice, you're saying like just a piece of your journey, just a little piece was like, hey, I ran that business wrong for 10 years. And like my entire business journey is shorter than just that one piece of your journey. So it's just crazy to like hear you talk about it like that, like in hindsight. But it brings to me the question, maybe like the ill-advised question. But if you look back, right, if you could like rewind and you could change something about yourself in the beginning that you feel would have helped you get to where you are now significantly faster over that time period. Like sometimes it just takes us a long time to learn the lessons that we need to learn. And obviously everybody, what they're looking for is just to accelerate that, right? Because do people grow over time? Absolutely. But like the best people can find a way to grow quicker, right? To get in 2 years where someone else, it might take them 10 years to get. So if you were to like rewind and you could change something about yourself at the beginning, that would have made the whole journey different. What would it have been?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, but I'll say, let me preface it real quick by saying this. I don't see any of it as a mistake. Like I think everything happens the way it's supposed to because it's what you need. And you make the decision, with our free will. That's a whole nother existential conversation we probably won't get into today, but I don't think we have just carte blanche free will as humans on earth. I think our soul decided to some level, like I want to have this kind of experience and make this kind of impact. And I think that's what we call destiny, right? Is like, we're destined to do something or things like that. We do believe many people believe there's some guiding force. So I do think things happen the way they need to. And I don't think karma's a bitch. I think karma is a blessing. And so if you do spend more years learning a lesson that could have learned faster, the ironic thing is that every time you miss a lesson, life brings it not back around to bite you in the butt like people think karma does. It just brings it back louder and stronger because you missed it the first time. And so you're going to learn it a lot better. And so if you learned it quick the first time and you only halfway learned it, and it wasn't really solidified or institutionalized in who you are, you might have made bigger mistakes down the road with another zero on the end of your business. Whereas maybe it was stubborn, but when it hit hard, and you're never making that mistake again. So there's all that comes into play, I believe. But with that being said, I would tell you, I think the number one, just in a 30, 40-minute podcast, the number one like short reel here to create for the social media packages, I think curiosity is key because it's akin to open-mindedness. And I think the more we think we know, the less that we're actually going to learn. And so I used to really think that I'm smart and creative, and I know you are too, or you wouldn't run a business like you do. But the more that we start to think our plans are the thing, and we get what I would say insistent on our plans and insistent on our decisions and things, we're resistant to change. And I think most people would agree, or as a 51-year-old now, I would say that one of the things I've learned in the bigger, grander scheme of things that you and I are talking about of my extra years here is just understanding that most of the best, beautiful things that happen in life weren't really premeditated. Life really tends to flow when you're open-minded. And a lot of the best things come through flow. And this is the insidious side of goals. And so as a business coach, it's hard for me because I'd kind of like to not have goals with anybody, and to say like, hey, just do your best every day and flow like a hippie and everything, all the best things will happen. But we do need structure in our life. But when we have goals that go from being an intention, like I have an intention to do it, to I'm insistent on doing this, I got to make a $10 million business. I got to make a $1 million business. Well, if I spend $1 million to make $1 million, I don't know that that's exactly what somebody's looking for. Like, why do you want the $1 million business, right? And so on my way to $1 million business, I might find, instead of $1 million business with a 20% margin, I might find my way to an $800,000 business with a 30% margin. And I just made 20% more money at the end of the day. And it was easier because I didn't have to do the extra couple $100,000 of work, right? Or I might realize that by being open-minded, I wind up with a $1.5 million business at the end of the year, right? And if I become insistent on only $1 million or 10 million or 100 million or whatever the people on this podcast are thinking, that resistance kills your curiosity because you're only focused on your myopic on one thing. And so, if I could go back and I would just tell myself to set intentions more than goals. And they need to be specific and measurable and time-based and all these things, or else they're not as good, right? They don't have the three-dimensional world we live in here is based on money and time. And we need all those measurement tools to be accurate. But the reality is I would make them intentions and I would be open-minded to what life is throwing at me, because a lot of times we're fighting something off because we kind of know we need it subconsciously and we don't want it. And we're fighting. We're like, all right. And you inevitably get stuck with it, or you give into it later and you're like, man, I should have done that 6 months ago. We all know that with holding on to an employee or making a business move, or there's things that we're resistant to for some reason. But why were we insistent on doing what we were doing or not doing, being scared to change our plans or admit we were wrong, and I think that curiosity is a higher vibration where you have access to creativity, versus insistence is a lower vibration where it's more frustration, annoyance, obligation. Does that make sense? And so if I could go back and redo, I wouldn't want to change anything, by the way. Literally, if you gave me one wish, going back and changing anything in my life is like 100 things down. I mean, there's a million other things I'd rather have than change anything that's happened. But if I could give advice to someone like myself, I would just say, hey, get really open-minded through the concept of curiosity. Whenever you're triggered, your emotions trigger like anxiety, obsession, anger, frustration, annoyance. Like you know what I'm talking about in business. Like when you're triggered, something happens and an emotion comes up. If you can use that trigger, even though the emotion comes up, go ahead and feel it. I'm not saying suppress your emotions, but go ahead and feel it, but don't act on it. Just allow the trigger to say, hey, let me be curious about why this might be good for me, instead of feeling frustrated. I can still feel frustrated, but what's the good in this? If you can instill that in your methodology for discernment, here's what I believe will happen is that you open your awareness to more information and you get more clear on what works and what doesn't work and why things are happening the way, and clarity collapses timelines. And the less you know and the more resistant you are to change, you're creating doubt. And doubt delays destiny. Doubt's like running in mud, in my opinion, when you're not sure and you're not clear. But if you can have clarity, which comes from awareness and open-mindedness, gosh, Brandon, I've seen people that have worked on stuff for years call and make one phone call in 10 minutes and change their entire business. Like in minutes, it's crazy. Like, time really is irrelevant. It's more about the discernment. Yeah, time has to play out, but your mind is what's controlling your actions, and your actions controlling your experience. And yeah, your experience plays out over time. But if I go back to what you asked me and people are wanting to collapse time, I would focus on really, really deep clarity. And I would look to obtain that through curiosity and open-mindedness. And I think not only will people grow and be more successful faster, I think they'll enjoy life more, right? It's kind of like smelling the roses along the way, I guess.
Yeah, which is a piece of growth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it is a piece, like you said, you see things differently. It's the way that I've thought about this from time to time, like on that topic of collapsing time, is you always, in hindsight, given enough time, like the only variable is how much time does it take, but you can see the good in the situation. You can see the lesson to be learned. You can see how you can change. It's just for some people, some situations, that happens 5 minutes after whatever the trigger is. And then some people, some situations, it happens 5 years after the trigger is right. And I think the
or never.
growth for the growth formula kind of being like, how do you make that time? Yeah, or never, right? Is how do you compress that time a little bit? But I could tell you the question that came to my mind as you were explaining all this, because your ideas on goals are, something I haven't really heard before. Honestly, not super misaligned from kind of where I started as a person. I used to think like, what's the point of setting goals? Because I'm just going to do the best I can anyways. So it doesn't matter,
Mhm.
right? Like whatever I've ever the best I can is going to produce whatever it's going to produce. Like me saying this goal doesn't really change anything. And then as my business has grown, I sort of understand goals in a business context a lot
Mhm.
different, right? And if you look at how do you have a business where everybody's rowing the same direction, like it starts with the goals, it starts with the clear vision, that like almost like needs to be stubborn enough for people to know what they're doing and fit into that. Like for example, at Bateman Collective, we say no to clients all the time that come to us and say, "Hey, could you do digital marketing for this?" And it's like, well, no, the vision is we only do it for this, and we're not going to do it for other stuff. And like, do we want to do it for some other stuff? Like, will that seem like a good idea? Will it be a revenue opportunity that will be hard to pass up? Absolutely. But we think we need to be disciplined and stay on the course and do the right thing. And because we decided like this is the right thing to do, right? So when I picture, can I run this business from me as a leader? Can I do what you're talking about and set like intentions, not goals, and have that like flexibility, that curiosity, be seeking that clarity that you're talking about? Like, I think I can. But then if you think, well, what's going to actually impact my business? It's going to be how I show up, of course, but it's also going to be how the senior leaders in my business show up, who are actually responsible for a lot of these decisions day to day, right? So if you think like the standard model of business is that control and those goals and everything comes from the top, and that's how you get everybody aligned on what's important. And the idea of flexibility and intentions instead of goals and stuff like seems nice for me personally, but when I picture it as like a
Mhm.
business operating system, I don't see how it works.
Yeah. I'll just,
By the way, not at all a
no,
criticism. Like it's
I'm
very much like a
just, no.
curiosity. Like, is this something that you figured out? Like, how do you make this work as an entrepreneur for you yourself, or do you actually apply similar advice into your meetings and your team
There's
within
there's a
your own
couple things, and
companies?
the only reason I was hesitating is because I was just trying to decide how to best answer this, because that's a great question. I'd rather actually run like a 4-part series where you and I go off on a tangent for hours on this. I'll drop some things in here, and I know later you're gonna ask like how people can get in touch with me, and like this is the kind of stuff I geek out on. So if it resonates with people, they should definitely try to reach out and connect on this. But because it may not make total sense to everyone what I'm getting ready to say, but I do think it'll pique the interest of the right people, and I think you might be one of those people based on the question you asked. A couple things.
Mhm.
Let me say one thing just to preface this. When you were talking about collapsing time and things, here's what's crazy. I do a lot of different, I'm not going to call it meditation from like a hippie standpoint, but it's more like a channeling of just like being focused to pull knowledge in on certain topics, and cut distraction and whatever. But for the sake of this podcast, let's call it meditation. One of the things that I have come to have an awareness around, at least in my life and my perspective and my experience, is almost all of the problems you have in life that we ever deal with that we see as a problem, even if we're like enlightened and we see it as an opportunity, but that's just a packaging, because it's like around an expectation, which is different than an intention, which is internal. An expectation is I have an attachment to the result. I think something's not going to happen, or I do think it is going to happen. So in business, we talk about expectations as good things. In the spiritual awareness world, we talk about as horrible because they lead to disappointment or doubt, typically expectations, because you have an attachment to a result. You're not open to the flow. And that's where a lot of that resistance comes, because you're like, that's not what I wanted to happen. Like I was looking for this. But what's really interesting is I would challenge anyone here to sit down and talk about the top 5 or 10 problems they have now or have had over the last, I don't care. Just look at your entire life. Time is the constraint that is almost always what turns it into making it feel like a problem. If we knew we had an infinite, if we weren't bound by time in this life, we really typically wouldn't worry about almost anything. There would be no, I got to do this while I'm young. I can only have a family now because I'm going to get older. I can only, so time is the biggest constraint in everything. And it's usually the thing that causes a lot of our anxiety, stress, or obsession or urge or whatever. Now, it's also the reason that creates urgency and things like that. So we also might just sit around doing nothing if we knew we didn't have any, YOLO, like one life to live or whatever, like if we didn't feel that. So I'm not saying it's all good or bad. I'm just saying it's a really interesting thing to play with, is like the concept of how time messes with what you're perceiving to be important in your life. I guess a couple of things I would say is the biggest piece. Here's two components to answer your question, and then I'll let you dig in whichever direction or change directions if you want. I'm working on a process that I'm instilling in my business and other clients' businesses. I think honestly, Brandon, I think it's going to become some like material that we produce and distribute eventually. But it's this idea that we all are mostly in Earth working on this horizontal structure where it's time and money based for the most part. What most people don't have a structure to apply is the purpose and mission part of what they do. EOS is cool, has the VTO. So it's like, where do you want to be in 10 years? And what's your 3-year picture? And what are your core values? And like, there's things like that that give you some form to the function. But the reality is there's a vertical alignment that has nothing to do with time and money. And it's who you are as a soul, or as your, if you don't believe in soul stuff, it's like, who's your highest and best version of you? And if you believe in source, love, God, higher power, like if you believe there's any other thing up there, even if it's just source code, like the Matrix, whatever it is, God, whatever, whichever way you want to look at it, there's this energy you were before you became in this life that you probably go back to when you leave, and there's potentially some kind of destiny or life plan or whatever. And many people believe different versions of this, but quite frankly, even if you think you spontaneously combusted into a human in your mom's belly and then you turn into dirt when you die, even if you don't believe in anything else, and you think life's all random, this still applies where there's some best version of you that you could be. And that lives outside of time and money. And when you're in vertical alignment with that, for about, let's call it 25, 30% of your focus, but it has to be primary. You do that first. Most people go straight to the horizontal. I want to make this much money in this amount of time. And they're as horizontal, and they're going this way, and they've lost the focus of like where their purpose is in life. And you know this, how many people have finally become wealthy who don't care more about the legacy they're leaving, the purpose that they're, how they're changing the world, who they were intended to be, what's their mission, as we all make more money, we all lean more, almost everyone I know leans more into that side of it. And so there is this piece, let's just call it 30%. It's the foundation you build the house on, is the vertical alignment. And it's okay if you don't know exactly who you are and what your purpose in life is, but we're working towards that. And then if we apply the horizontal alignment after it, it's the bulk, it's the 70+% of our focus. But when we focus only on the horizontal time and money stuff, we're getting out of whack. And so if we start to have a new paradigm around how we're looking for the intersection of personal achievement and purpose and alignment and mission and impact, and figuring out where that crosses the time and money piece, because we still need to make that. That's one piece of this where you'll be more intentful in what you're doing and more in alignment philosophically. And then to answer the other piece of your question is, I think tactically, is have intentions around your annual stuff and your 10-year, 5-year, 1-year. And I'm not one for flip-flopping on things, but I do think having inflection points where 6 months into the year, we're gathering data daily, we're considering it weekly, and we're tweaking monthly, and we're making changes quarterly. And then, a couple times a year, I think you should look at it and be like, hey, what's really happened here? Even EOS, I think a lot of people understand that model, so I use it a lot, and we help a lot of our clients with EOS. Even that quarterly, if you've been through that process, one of the first things the quarterly process does is we ask, have your core values changed? Has your 10-year target changed? You don't go in and tear it all open every quarter, but you at least consider and say, hey, do we know for a fact any of this is out of alignment? And then annually, we really dig in and say, hey, have we changed as an organization? So I think if you can build in these milestones of like gut checking that vertical piece, like put the vertical structure in, at least care about it. maybe don't focus on it, but at least know it's there. And that's more about purpose, mission, and impact and things and value. And then have these points where you're willing to just ask yourself how in alignment with the vertical part we are while we're chasing the horizontal time and money. And then everyone's already doing it annually. They'll change their goals annually. They don't have a problem with that. I'm just suggesting that you might be willing to tweak them quarterly. And 6 months into the year, if you're more than 20% above your goal or behind it, it's probably worth adjusting. There's nothing worse than chasing a goal you know you're not going to hit halfway through the year. And if you've already beat it, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough. So that was a long-winded answer, Brandon, but hopefully that helps. I just think there's some level of bigger perspective and flexibility that you can put into play that allows you to not just flip from goals to intentions, but to blend it a little bit so that you're just not so rigid and you're more open-minded. But we still need to have some of that rigidity because like you said, I'll add to what you said. You said it's hard to get an organization as it grows to row in the same direction. You're right. But what's more important is getting to row at the same time is the cadence of accountability. And so if I get you all paddling, but everyone's doggy paddling in the same direction, we're still not really getting anywhere. But if we're calling out that cadence of pull as a leader, so management will get you row in the same direction, but leadership will get you to row in the same time. And then that's combining the two pieces. And that's where you start cooking with gas and we remove friction and we increase momentum. And that's where I see people make quantum leaps, not just in their success, but their happiness.
Yeah. Let me explain what I took from what you just said. And I want to make sure like I am understanding it right. So the traditional business structure is like, well, it comes from top. It comes from the top. It's rigid. We know exactly what we're trying to achieve. There's like the strict accountability for everybody on the team, what exactly they have to contribute to that. And you're saying like all of that kind of stuff, that's like, is that the biggest portion of it? It absolutely is. But when it's that and it's only that, then the game is completely different than if also some percentage of your focus is on all these other things. Right. Like in my company, one thing we say is, well, what's the word? It's like non-numbers wins.
Yes.
Like that kind of stuff is really important, right? Because you and I both know a lot of stuff that can't be measured is really, really important. And it actually affects stuff that can be measured. And that attitude of like flexibility, of curiosity, in combination with like if you think what is all that stuff built to do? It's built to give clarity, right? But curiosity, like you mentioned, also creates clarity. Just having like clarity one time and then being stubborn to that's not necessarily the answer. But I think that is how a lot of businesses run. So you're basically advocating for like that continual, like it's both. Like you need both of these things, but don't fall into the trap of just having the one.
Fully agree. If you want to think of it this way, to kind of wrap that whole piece up that we just talked about is, in a bowling lane, have you ever played where you put the bumpers up or seen kids where they put the bumpers up? Well, one bumper is like your core values and ethics and morals, and the other bumper is like your mission and 10-year target. And once you have those up, you can throw the ball as hard as you want down just wing it, and you're not going to hit gutter balls. Like that keeps you inside the guardrails, but then there's still all this stuff to navigate, like which requires the time and money-based structure and all these other, which is the bulk of what we're doing. But what we want to avoid is just being able to totally go off the rails. And those guardrails really help us stay focused on kind of the soul of the business, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does make sense. Let's talk more tactical. So the first question I'd asked you was, what would you do to accelerate personal growth earlier? And it's a much more like soft skill kind of thing. Your answer was awesome. That's like from a hard skill standpoint. It's like Steve has this hard skill today that if he had that hard skill from the beginning, he would be a lot further along today, right? And by extension, in theory, if I had that hard skill now, I would be moving faster. If you had it further developed, you'd be off even better. Like, what's that number one skill that you feel is holding entrepreneurs back?
I could probably argue a few different points here, but I think this is very relevant. And I think this is most broad-based across the board, independent. I know we're probably talking to a lot of real estate investors and, people that are in certain segments, in certain businesses, but, the reality is being able to turn your business into a math equation. There's a skill set with being able how to determine metrics and more importantly, KPIs, that you and I both know this from the masterminds we're in. People are terrible until they get into a mastermind or have a coach. They don't ever really do that stuff very well. And then eventually the first iteration is they're doing it because someone told them they had to. And then they come and they throw their numbers up on the board in front of everyone, and they're kind of proud they did it, which is cool, but they don't really know their admin did it and their VA did some of it, and Go High Level told them some of it. And then as soon as you ask them questions, they're like, I don't know. That's what the system, I just threw these numbers together. It's like, are they really good or accurate? But then there's these levels of really understanding it to where, you know, and I'll draw a bridge here because I think part of my purpose in life is to bring the practicality of spirituality. Like, I don't want to take a bunch of business owners and make them hippies, you know, with all the spiritual stuff, but I do think there's a lot of practicality, and I do want to combine people's personal growth and their business growth and realize that we're a holistic being in a greater, you know, world. I'll say that karma is very related to KPIs. And even though that's a very spiritual term, it's just pattern recognition. If I treat people this way, this is what happens. It's pattern recognition. So is KPIs. It's understanding that leading activities drive lagging results. And more importantly is being able to do like a compound metric, which is like, I had this many pitches and I got this many clients, and divide that, I have a closing ratio. ROAS, obviously, as a marketing company, is a big compound metric that we talk about that has several pieces to it. And understanding within a context of a business model and the value you're bringing to the world and your pricing and things, and being able to reverse that down to leading activities that drive lagging results. And more importantly, do the math, the averages, the ratios, because numbers by themselves, if you're like, hey, I made 13 offers last week, I got 7 contracts, like those are just, they're not really relative or context based. And so if I can divide 2 numbers together and say I had a 25%, you know, closing ratio on offers, that's a compound metric that gives me a lot of context. But then I need to be able to relate that to what it should be. And so I need a goal versus actual. So I want to do math between numbers that are important to create compound metrics. And then I want to compare an actual versus a goal. Now I have relativity and context. Within the greater idea of understanding activities that drive results and just the ratio, like levers and buttons. And as a business owner, at this point now, KPIs are like one of my love languages and kind of how I see the world. Like, it's all zeros and ones. I can sit down with anybody and be like, tell me about your business. And I can quickly determine the leading activities that are somewhat in control, that you can make sure they happen. They're also indicative or influenceable of success. I can look at what results along the way move the needle, start doing some math, understand industry averages or best practices. We can extrapolate everything from that. Do you have the right employees? Do they know what to do? Are they trained correctly? Are they being managed? How do I need to lead people to motivate them? How can I increase profits in my company? How can I decrease expenses? How can I scale revenue? Every single question can be driven off of the numbers, and being able to turn your business into a math equation so you can solve for success and read any report that's handed to you, and also know how to construct a report with all that stuff I talked about, math and relativity and things. If you can learn the language of KPIs, you can succeed in anything. Quite frankly, losing weight, macros, the food you eat, are numbers. Micros are your blood work, reps and sets, and VO2 max and your weight and your muscle mass. It's all just the same stuff. Like, you could even probably look at your marriage and say, hey, you know, how many date nights, and on a scale of 1 to 10, how do my wife and I rate our happiness right now as a couple? Like, there's this idea, again, that's why it ties so closely to like this karma and other things, is pattern recognition, and being able to be aware of your environment and break that down into like what I need to do to get what result I'm looking for, and the relationships will make you successful at literally anything in life, not just business.
I love the way that you describe it, where numbers are no longer just like a thing that you have somewhere, but they're actually a thing that you like, because what you're understanding, it's what you're explaining, it's like a deep understanding where like I've noticed I've developed this a little bit over time, where like I can look at something, I can instantly figure out
Mhm.
what's off based on the metrics, because I have such a good gut against those metrics because I'm looking at those particular metrics all the time and I understand what influences them. I understand what's normal, all that kind of stuff. Like that's like a skill I think you only get through
Mhm.
practice. But I can tell you the big thing that made a difference for me too is the accuracy of the numbers. I mean, how many people have numbers in their business versus, I mean, we had a client the other day saying like, oh, this marketing's not working. I'm going to quit. And then we like look at their stuff. We're like, you have a 6x return. They're like, wait, I have a 6x return. And I just didn't realize things were going awesome. Right. It is really funny, but I love the way that you describe that because it paints a vision of like what that can look like eventually. And I honestly don't know. Like I do feel like I've made a lot of progress in that over the years. I don't know the way to describe how to get there other than like you just do it over and over again. Like even in the last week, like I have certain spreadsheets with numbers in them that I've looked at like on a weekly basis for 3 years that I just saw in a completely different light and I understood them
Well,
completely differently. It's crazy how you could just like you can change just a little bit and enough practice, enough repetition, and it changes
100%.
the
I
game.
know we're running short on time, but I'll just, in 20 seconds, I'll give people 5 steps for that. It's, what we do with clients is number one is you have to define what the actual metrics are, really what they are and where to get them. Because people call a closing ratio one thing or they call an appointment one thing versus like, what's an offer? Is it a soft pass of a number to a client or is it a written, like, let's get really clear on what the metrics are, what are they called and what really are they? And then second, I need to know where to pull them accurately and consistently. And until I do those two dominoes, I can't move on. Once I move on, step 3 is the math I talked about, where I start to do compound metrics. Step 4 is where I'm going to relate actuals to goals. So I have context to make. That's where the proactive decision making comes into play, is at step 4, because now I have context to where I am versus where I want to be. That's where it shifts from reactively chasing numbers and staring at them to like making proactive decisions in real time. But step 5 is how do I put that into a dashboard with a cadence of like, I get this report weekly, I get this one quarterly, I get this one monthly. And when do I look at them and what decisions am I making? And so I have a dashboard in step 5, but defining what they are, figuring out how to get them accurately and consistently. Step 2, step 3 is the math. Step 4 is the measurement of goal versus actual. And step 5 is putting them into a process within which you look at them at a certain cadence with a certain proactive decision making. And like, I know that was more than 20 seconds, but those 5 things, if anybody's trying to really take what we just talked about away from this, that's the best way that I've learned to teach it and help someone implement things. And you can't skip a step. You can create a dashboard with just random numbers that you don't know. If you skip step 1 and just make a dashboard, which is what a lot of people do, they're like, someone gave me a KPI template and I threw all my numbers into it. That is skipping all the steps and you're just staring at numbers. And quite frankly, you'll probably make bad decisions because you don't even know what you're looking at.
And that's crazy. I don't think I've ever heard like the stages described like so succinctly and so simply. So yeah, if you don't feel like you have solid numbers, like hit rewind real quick, just like write down each of those 5 stages. Like that's fantastic, Steve. And it doesn't have to take a long time. I mean, you could get through all 5 stages in a
It's
month
iterative
if you really
too.
wanted to.
Just start with 5 or 6 numbers. Go through all the 5
Yeah.
steps with 5 numbers and then add 2 or 3 more and go through the 5. You know what I mean? It's like every time you want to grow or expand, just start with a few numbers. Start with spend and revenue. Just start with 2 numbers. What did I spend? What did I make? And then get those accurate and then layer in leads and then layer in sales conversion and then layer in fulfillment and all that stuff.
Yeah, 100% agreed. All right, Steve.
Yeah.
Time for us to wrap up here. If anybody wants to get a hold of you, number one, why would they or should they? And then number
Yeah,
2, how
for
would
sure.
they?
I'm the worst guy with like social media now because you and I were talking about this pre-show, but I'd love to be like, follow me on Instagram. But my joke is like, if I send you to my Instagram account, you'll never see me again. You'll look at my old posts. So, what I would love to do for you guys, and we know each other from family and boardroom masterminds, and I'm just going to make a personal form available and it's the Team Architects. And I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes, theteamarchitects.com/Bateman. And I'll just create a form. And what you and I talked about pre-show, and I know we're short on time, but our Team Architects company has a really cool personality and cognition test that you can apply to any position in the company to see how good or not good somebody fits. And that's something that I would love to make available to anybody that just wants it for the sake of knowing who they are in the business or who their employees are. So if they want to utilize the team architects assessment there, or they just want to get in contact with me, the big thing I have a heart for is the private coaching that I do, where I can really work with people one-on-ones to really help them build the business that is designed to work for them instead of them working for it. And so I enjoy that. But yeah, I'll just put that form together. It'll just come straight to me. And if anybody wants to get in contact with me, I'd love to talk to them. And I'll just say this, Brandon, I know we got to go. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and watch what you guys do. It is such a cutthroat world in marketing in general, and then marketing agencies is more cutthroat. And then digital marketing is like, it's almost like property management, because I used to be in property management back in the day. It's like the fastest way to piss a client off is to manage their PPC or to manage their properties. That's really easy, but it's also the way to make them really happy. But you guys do such a good job, and you have such a good heart, and you guys are, in the best way, geeks at heart of how do you really become like surgical at what you do. And I've always appreciated that. And yeah, I just want you guys to keep up the good work. And I was really, I feel grateful to be on the podcast, and anything I can do to help your guys' clients or audience, I'm always all up for it.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you, Steve. And thank you for providing that way for people to connect with you. I can tell you Team Architects is a pretty cool product, recruiting process, all that kind of stuff. We didn't even talk too much about recruiting. Half of me thought that was going to be your answer to the hard skill that you needed early on in your career. The numbers are important too. But yeah, anyways, highly encourage you guys. Steve's a cool guy to talk to if you want to take a good look at yourself or at your business. So with that, that concludes our episode today. And for everybody listening, I will see you next week.